the amount of blessing that it takes to really have a man move toward cohesiveness and fullness of his selfhood is enormous. And this is something we've forgotten. We think that, people just mature and flower, and they don't. So this is the context. And human beings have been preoccupied with this idea of the mystery of evil. How does this evil get into the world? When there's this good creation that comes, what happens that suddenly it splits, and then you've got the good blessed ones and the bad cursed ones? There are really two of you here. There is the you that got blessed, and there's the you that didn't get blessed, that got cursed and got thrown out the window. See? So there's the context. And let me just run through how this thing has come down in the history of culture. Are you aware that probably some of the oldest mythology of the peoples of Earth are the mythology of the twins? If you start getting into the study of mythology, you'll find that there are twin myths in practically every human culture on Earth. The one that perhaps you've heard of is the myth around the founding of Rome. And what you see in that mythology, you've got these twins born. For the city to get really established, the one of them, something bad's going to happen to one of them, see. The one who is reprobate, the one who is left out, the one who is cursed. So you see it right there in the founding of one of the civilizations that was in the history of our culture, Romulus and Remus, but it's all over everywhere. In biblical tradition, you got the good creation, you got Adam, you got one blessed one. And then when Eve comes in, see, everybody doesn't notice the main thing about that. You move to duality, you move to two. And when you move to two, then you got this splitting problem already. It's already there. It doesn't get picked up and made real clear until you get Cain and Abel. The one that God liked and the one that God didn't like quite as much. Later on in the tradition, you get Jacob and Esau. You get the older brother who is a little bit slower, more in touch with nature, and you get the younger brother who is a trickster, quick in his mind, and is able to steal his brother's birthright. And so that's the kind of you can see this thing. All this talk about the birthright. What is the birthright? How is that birthright related to blessing? Can somebody steal your birthright? How do you feel when your birthright gets stolen? There's where we get the origins of the homicidal feelings. See? Now, you see this really clearly in some of the roots of Christianity in Zoroastrianism, where you get the origins of religious dualism. Ahura Mazda is the sun god, the good god of truth and justice, and Ahriman is the archdemon god of evil and all the bad things. So this comes down on into Christianity, and it is a concept that is precious to many, many religious groups. It's not just Christians. I mean, this is what I want you to get a feeling for. You and I are the people of God, and they are the reprobate. This whole doctrine of election, I don't know how many of you had a chance to study history, but this whole doctrine of election has been the foundational philosophy in mythology which European civilization used to justify colonialism. It used it to justify the systematic genocide of indigenous populations. And so this idea of the experience of the other and how you're going to deal with the other is something that's very, very old. It comes up through these myths, but it's been with us a long, long time, probably more than 3 or 4 million years. Do you follow that now? Do you see the tie between the chosen son, who is one of the elect, one of the people of God? And the Puritans thought that, see, now if you're one of the elect, then the way we'll be able to tell that is you're going to prosper. So you guys that have recently been remaindered in your corporations and are now on unemployment, see, in terms of the Puritan myth, see, the reason for your losing your job is because you're not one of the elect. See, Max Weber did this whole study. The greatest sociologist that ever lived was Max Weber. And he did this book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And what that book is about what it does to you when you think you are the chosen, manifest destiny person to succeed. And if you are, see, now you know that you're chosen, but if you're really chosen, you're going to prosper. So if you have a bad day on the stock market, you begin to wonder. See, so there's a built-in anxiety motor. So any failure that you have, any setback that you have raises a question, well, am I really one of the reprobate? Did they get me mixed up in the cradle? And they thought I was the one that was the elect one, but really I was the one that should have gone out the window. And so there's this built-in anxiety engine, but there's the other side of it. There is the engine that says you are entitled. That's the blessing, the assumed blessing engine. See, you are entitled. One of the reasons for the mess we are in is that a lot of our people that ought to be cultural leaders, stewarding wisdom of the human past, have taken it as their job to destroy it and to make it the purview of only a very narrow elite. And this is happening wholesale now, friends. What you got to understand is that those little blips of inclusiveness in education that we thought we were going to get in the 60s and thereafter, that stuff's going down the tubes now. There are fewer minority people in colleges and universities now than there were some few years ago. And more and more people are not having scholarship aid to go to college. Mm-hmm. The thing about it is, though, we got to watch that because the magician in you ought to be blessed too. You got a 2-million-year-old mind, and every truck driver has got a 2-million-year-old mind. And it's a part of this classist curse that so many wonderful young men of color and Caucasians believe that they are stupid and that they don't have any right to becoming educated and participating in the riches of the human past. And listen, this is burgeoning now. Pretty soon, if we don't change something, pretty soon we're going to see the establishment of a radically classist culture that is much worse than it is right now. We're moving toward a world in which there's not going to be a middle class. There's going to be a very rich elite that lives in fortified enclaves. It is an ugly reality that's developed. The community deteriorates, and what happens to our selfhood, our cohesiveness of our human selves? They fragment worse. That's a rule. You can take that to the bank. The less participation in community and significant relationships you've got, it doesn't matter how much therapy you've ever had. It doesn't matter how good your childhood was. If you have not got an adequate self-object milieu, that's the $150 word. All that means is you don't have a community. That is to say, you do not have people that affirm your selfhood and who are at your shoulder and at your back when you're in a crisis. So here you are. Put yourself in the place of these young fathers, these young mothers. No extended family, They're in some other city. The needs of the children are so enormous. And then the need of the child in me and the need of the child in my wife is so enormous. And they're trying to parent. Indigenous peoples knew better than that. They knew you couldn't raise children with a nuclear couple like that. And so this is what you're getting at. We've got to face up to this. We've got to be in the business of community building. And the reason I say men is because we have been the ones that have really imbibed a lot of this Lone Ranger mythology. and see if we are up to stretching our minds around the idea that all this election crap, all this talk, is a result of splitting. It's a result of a failure in the cohesiveness of our selfhood. It is the idea that the world is a zero-sum game. If I win, you must lose. And what I want us to get a sense for is the psychological wound which underlies all of this. And I want to loop this back to another kind of mythology which we also see, which is, I believe, just as old, if not older, than the twins' mythology. And it is the mythology of the abandoned children that you see coming up in, Robert often tells the story of Hansel and Gretel. Now, you see this coming up again in Star Wars. The abandoned twins. See, I'm going to suggest to you that the experience of abandonment precedes the experience of this splitting. Because in those abandonment stories, in Hansel and Gretel don't hate each other. There's these royal children, a prince and a princess, and they are born into the world, and they are supposed to receive the kingdom. And something happens. Here's the mystery of iniquity, see? Mystery of evil. Something happens. And in different stories, it's a different happening. But something happens, and what happens is that these twins are cast into exile where they are no longer recognized as royal. And so these most precious children are born into the world in a royal household, and they, because of something that's not their fault, something that's the very important piece there, something that is not their fault, they are exiled. And they are raised by a woodsman in his family, or a fisherman in his family, or a herdsman in his family. And until many years later, they are not recognized as who they are. And later on in these myths, they are often restored to the rightful inheritance. The point is that before the rage and the splitting, where there's a good one and a bad one, there's a prior abandonment. A lot of our abandonment is pre-verbal. We've all got this mythology of there was a time when it wasn't all shit. But the psychoanalytic studies are showing us that a great deal of that stuff occurs before you have speech, before you have language. What many of the I think more creative psychoanalytic thinkers have been talking about is, as Michael Balint says, there's a basic fault. He points out, that's earlier than speech. You can't remember that. And so you can't speak it. But this stuff's in your body. You got a lot of rage and pain and grief in your body that can't get through the computers up here to get put into words. And it's an experience of being not touched when you needed to be touched, not held when you needed to be held. It's experiences of looking up in your cradle and seeing disgusted eyes. The experience of circumcision. So when I started getting into this in my analysis, starting kind of get back, trying to get my feelings around what it must have been like for me as an infant, then some stories that I had been told came back about the fact that I could not hold any food when I was very, very, very small. Right after I was born, they called it colic in those days in the South. And if it hadn't been for my father, who got me in one of those old Chevy cars, you know, and drove me 100 and something miles over to Memphis to a doctor who had some wisdom about dealing with colicky little boys, I'd be dead. Dehydration. But what it was is my mother could not stand all this shit and anxiety, see. And see, that is the kind of, and I haven't healed that, and I don't think I probably ever will. And so the first seed of rage comes out of that early experience of there not being enough. Robert talks a lot lately about the greed in our culture and the rapacious hunger. Michael Meade tells the story of the cannibal king. He eats his people. Eats everybody, and finally eats himself, you know. Well, this is the territory you're talking about there, this sense of scarcity, and we got to ask a question. You got to ask it for your own life. Where is this coming from? See, what is this sense of scarcity? What is this sense that we've got to make sure that minorities don't get any progress because there's not enough to go around, etc., etc.? Because it's all related to this mythology and the human experience that underlies it. So, now, where does this leave us? We're left with this situation in which we experience an abundance of curses and a scarcity of blessing. If anything, indigenous peoples were much, much better about the sense of blessing than people in the history of the modern West. If you look at the recent history in the West, it is a history of an experienced declining supply of blessings. And Robert talks about a movement now that we see toward a more and more of a sibling society. And that's another way of sibling, rather than having any parents around to bless. Nobody's around to bless. That's true. This is what is happening all around the world. More and more elders are being disempowered. And the more and more tribal elders and indigenous elders are disempowered, the less blessing there will be around. And the more and more fathers are marginalized and disempowered, the less and less blessing there will be around. So we see a long history here. It's a long, tragic.
Terrible vision.
It's a tragic history. And the thing is, our denial is so massive. If it were just a historical problem, that would be one thing. But what we have to realize is that this big snake of rage isn't just back there. And he isn't just out there. What we've got to realize is we have this great snake inside us. And it is a snake that is so enraged because he's never been seen. And when he was ever seen, he was cursed and not blessed. And each one of us men here were cursed in a little different pattern. A little different snowflake of curses, you know. But each one of us has this shadow brother who is inside, who carries an enormous amount of our gold. And so this is the situation, and the situation is such, it gets worse. That is to say, this stuff is cumulative. Tribal peoples always knew that hatred was contagious. They always knew that it just sort of permeated things and would contaminate the entire group if you didn't address it. And a lot of the ritual that we had in indigenous cultures was to help us deal with our experiences of being cursed and to try to get back into the blessing way, and to facing this split, and to facing the way in which culture has sanctified this split, and religion has sanctified this split. But today I just want us to stay with our sense of the awfulness of this, our history. The only way we can deal with our denial about this is together as men, as a community of men. And so we've got the task of really looking at this penchant. They used to call that original sin. I don't think that's original sin, but it is an enchantment. It is a tendency to get enchanted and lose touch with things. And we've really got to stay on that. The other task is we've got to try to figure out if they're like Hansel and Gretel. We got to figure out if there is a trail of bread through the woods, or if there's a golden thread somewhere that can lead us out of this shit. Because we're on a downhill spiral. We have to start dealing with the enormity of the emotional investment to bring selves to flower. We've got this idea that it's like McDonald's. This is not the way this works. When you try to have fast food maturation with limited investment, what you get is monster boys and monster girls. And the thing is, it's not their fault. When there's no gardener, the fact that things don't grow quite right, it's not the weeds' fault, see.
You know, Gary Snyder had an image that there are cultures that are old growth cultures, you know, with lots of trees in them.
Yeah.
And he says the way we are raising our children is basically slash and burn.
Slash and burn. And see, this is what I think men's work has to take a decisive stance against. Every one of us have got to say, we understand that there must be eldering. One doesn't wait till one's 55 to do this. There's a lot of blessing and nurturing young men need to do. And one of the things that I see a lot is young men blessing older men and saying, hey, you guys, we need you. Because otherwise they start feeling like they are part of this throwaway fast food thing, you know. Styrofoam elders, you know. Now, if you look at Gilmore's book on manhood in the Making, it's something you ought to all look at. It's the best anthropological survey of traits of men. What do grown-up men do? One of the things they do is they provide. Providing, protecting, and procreation. So what I think we got to do is to understand that we simply want men who accept their responsibility to see to it that provision is made. These wealthy folks have got to learn something about stewardship. And these wealthy businessmen have got to, even though they've got theirs, they need to be challenged by men to say, well, so what are you doing about employment for young males in the cities? Now, frankly, I know a lot of these dudes. Shit, I analyze a lot of these dudes. They are smart, creative people. And they could do something about this if they even hadn't thought that it had anything to do with who they were. Well, now question, why does it not occur to them that this is a part? This is back to your capitalist ideology. If you're a Friedman capitalist ideologist, you won't take that. Oh my God, if I did any good works, well, it would fuck up the system. So anyway, now let's tie this thing together now. We have evolved as a primate species from predecessors who knew full well how when the territory got crowded, we'll just kill those motherfuckers. So we've got a long heritage of being willing to kill our brothers and sisters for territory. And so we got to look at that stuff. It comes out in the myths. It gets ratified and sanctified by religion. And you know the most liberal, this is what I'll stop with what pisses me off. The fucking social justice Christians, the ones that pride themselves on being the most socially aware and socially conscious, are still selling wholesale the idea that Christians are the people of God. And everybody else is not. And so you see how hard it is for well-meaning people that mean well, people that are trying to be good, trying to even be politically fucking correct. And they still can't get the idea that this people of God idea is part of the oldest trap that mankind in general has sought to sanctify. And so this is our problem. I believe that if men pull together, I think it's important that men make a very specific contribution as men, and partnership with women and community, but men have got to face it. A lot of this is male shit. And we have work to do, and I think that we can make a decisive turn. But I don't, these fundamentalists that think that's already in the pocket, man, they don't understand that there's enormous important work to do, and that's what we're here to do. Thank you a lot.